So, to the surprise of a lot of us, Henry Cejudo has announced on his YouTube channel that, contrary to what he said before going into the Merab fight, he is no longer retiring and he still wants to keep fighting in the UFC.
So I'm here today, ladies and gentlemen, taking my word back as a man, confronting you guys, you the people, you my fans, you my family, you my friends, you the haters, that I just cannot go out like this. And guys, to say the least, it is far from over with the Triple C.
In May of 2020, when Henry Cejudo first retired, I wasn't a fan of the UFC yet. It wouldn't be until later in the year, around September, I think, that I started following the UFC closely, all thanks to Israel Adesanya. And it wouldn't take long after I started following the UFC that the name Henry Cejudo, aka Triple C, started popping up on my radar. And at first, I didn't pay attention to it, seeing how this guy wasn't even an active fighter. I really wasn't paying so much attention to it. But then, when I eventually did pay attention to this name, I quickly saw why, even though this guy was not an active fighter, his name was always getting mentioned and his name always sounded so relevant in discussions in the UFC. This guy was first an Olympic champion before joining the UFC, and then he joins the UFC and he works his way to becoming one of the 4 fighters in the history of the promotion to ever become simultaneous 2 division champion. I mean, this is an exclusive list that includes fighters like Amanda Nunes, Daniel Cormier, and Conor McGregor. Clearly not a small feat to achieve. I mean, even John Jones, the GOAT of this sport, cannot brag of this achievement that Henry Cejudo has. So, as you'd expect, I immediately placed this guy on a pedestal in my mind. Even though I was yet to watch any of his fights, I didn't need to watch any of his fights. I immediately placed him on a pedestal in my mind. And then, the image I had of him was that of like an almost untouchable fighter. I held him in high esteem, and after looking at his records and achievements and then finding out that he chose to retire while at the top of his game made me respect him even more. Nothing compares to leaving the stage when the ovation is the loudest, right? So this was why when he decided to come out of retirement 3 years later, and by this time I'd been a fan of the sport for over 2 years now, going towards 3 years. So when I heard that Henry Cejudo was coming out of retirement, I feared the worst for him. I felt a certain kind of way. And honestly, I felt bad for feeling this way because, this guy is a legend in the sport. But then 2 defeats later, and I guess I was right to feel the way I did about him. But then the reason why I'm making this video is because, before going into the Merab fight, Henry Cejudo clearly stated that if he lost the fight, he was going to retire. He was going to call it quits. So when he lost the fight, of course, a lot of us assumed that was the last we're going to see of Henry Cejudo in the ring as an active fighter. And if not for the fact that the UFC did not give him a chance to announce his retirement in the ring after the loss, he probably would have done an announcement of his retirement once again. But then the UFC did not give him the time to do that. They didn't give him the mic to do that. And I think this singular action from the UFC has turned out to be more of a curse than a blessing for Henry Cejudo, because I feel like if the UFC had allowed him time on the mic that night, he would have announced his retirement and then probably would have moved on from Henry Cejudo. But then the fact that this didn't happen now gave Henry Cejudo time to go, rethink, and now he has come out to say he is not retiring anymore. And it's just painful to me because I feel like this is a guy who had a perfect legacy, something a lot of fighters, even great fighters, can only dream of. But then him coming out of retirement has kind of like partly undone that for him. The general consensus about him is definitely going to change following these 2 losses he has amassed. And honestly, I just feel like Henry Cejudo's decision to no longer retire after this loss to Merab is going to end up being more costly than his decision to come out of retirement in the first place. Personally, I feel like he never should have come out of retirement. He should have kept what he had, that perfect record, that record that earned him the respect and, the admiration of a lot of fight fans, even people who didn't watch him in his active years like myself. I mean, Henry Cejudo first retired when he was 33, spent 3 years away from the sports, which we could argue those were part of his prime years, and then he came back at 36, now he's 37, going to 38, and I'm not going to hate on him for, believing in himself. I know deep down in his mind, Henry Cejudo really wants to come back and replicate what he did the first time. But let's be honest, how many fighters, even fighters who, didn't take time away from the sport, how many fighters in their 37, 38 actually start title runs and actually get to that point. The chances of that really happening now for him are really low because, come on, this guy retired when he was 33, spent 3 years away from the sport, came back at 36, 2 losses, now he's 37, and honestly, right now, I feel like Henry Cejudo needs help because to me, it just comes off like he is spiraling, Of course, this is a respected fighter. He came back and now 2 embarrassing defeats. His ego can't take the defeats. So, he's trying to, get that one more fight where, he can turn the narrative. But then I feel like what has happened, and for him, the best thing to do is just to move on. Because if he continues along this path, I feel like things will probably just get worse for him. Imagine he comes back, gets another fight, which I doubt the UFC are actually going to give him, but that's left to be seen. But then, if he actually gets this fight against Brandon Moreno, and now he gets another defeat, this is going to change the story from the guy that became double champion in the UFC and retired at the peak of his career to the guy who came back and went out with 3 straight losses. So yeah, personally right now I feel like all Henry Cejudo is doing is actually just ruining his legacy, and he really needs to stop at this point. I mean, of course 2 losses are embarrassing, but then imagine he keeps at it and then 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4, and only God knows when it stops. And then before you know, he goes from the guy we used to talk about with so much esteem, with so much respect, to someone we categorized in the same brackets as someone like Tony Ferguson, who is like the poster boy for fighters who went from a place of respect to becoming the laughingstock in the promotion. So honestly, I personally feel like Henry Cejudo should just stick to his original decision of retiring after the Merab loss and preserve what's left of his legacy. So yeah, that's how I personally feel about this Henry Cejudo situation. Please let me know what are your thoughts in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video.